search the scriptures, as Christ our God said in the Gospels, for in them we
Welcome, dear brothers and sisters, to Search the Scriptures Live, where we interpret the Bible according to the writings and the mind of the early church. I'm Dr. Jeannie Constantinu, and this is lesson 19 in our introduction to the New Testament. If you wish to join us tonight, you can do so with your comments or questions by calling us at 855-237-2346 or 855-AF-radio, or you can ask questions in the comment section of YouTube. And we usually get those also. Somebody's always watching those. We'll only answer questions that are pertinent to tonight's lesson. So don't ask just random questions, okay? But before we begin talking about translations, which is our subject matter for tonight, let's start with our prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Amen. Illumine our hearts, O Master who loves mankind, with the pure light of thy divine knowledge, and open the eyes of our minds to understand thy gospel teachings. Implant in us also the fear of thy blessed commandments, that trampling down all carnal desires, we may enter upon a spiritual manner of living, both thinking and doing such things that are well-pleasing to thee. For thou art the illumination of our souls and bodies, O Christ our God, and to thee we ascribe glory, together with thy Father who is from everlasting, and thine all holy and good and life-giving Spirit, always, now, and ever, and unto the ages of ages. Amen. So tonight we're going to be talking about translations and also my own personal experience doing translation. I thought I would share that with you before we begin. And we'll be talking about some of the more common and some of the more controversial of the English translations of the Bible since the King James Bible. This is what we were talking about last week. We talked about the King James and some of the early English Bibles. But before we begin talking about the Bible today, I thought I really don't like to talk too much about myself. I think at the risk of sounding sort of pretentious, I'd like to help you understand something about the translation process and what I discovered about it by doing that work myself. I don't know about you. I'm assuming that, you listening to this program, you're a person who wants to learn. There are a lot of people who really don't care, and they're just want to be entertained. But people who watch this program are interested in learning about things. And I'm like that too. I like watching documentaries. I like watching shows that teach you about something, how to make a Steinway piano, how I'm not interested in, the Kardashians or Real Housewives or anything like that. I don't watch anything like that. But about how people are homesteading in Alaska, or how they make a Steinway piano, or how a certain, automobile is made. This kind of a thing, I find it very interesting. So I thought I would share with you about something about the process of translation, which I was involved in as part of my PhD, because I think it's interesting and it might help you to understand some of the issues involved in translation. That's what's important for you. This is not just, about knowledge for its own sake or curiosity, but when you're considering reading a Bible, choosing a translation, or you run across a so-called patristic quotation that someone has given you or forwarded it to you, you should know something about the process of translation to know whether or not that is something that you should consider reliable or might raise alarms or red flags. Translations are very challenging. I admire the people who do them. I'm grateful for the people who do them. There are people who do them very well, and it's because of people who undertake this effort that we have translations in English of the Bible, of patristic works, and a lot of other things. And this is a skill. This is definitely a skill. It's very nerve-wracking because you want to do a good job, but you have to realize and accept the fact that there's going to be something missing in your translation. We talked about this last week. There's always something that is lost in translation because no translation is perfect. No translation fully captures the original sense. But for those of us who are reading in translation on a regular basis, it's helpful to us that we have the translation at all. So we're grateful to the translators, even though their translation is never going to be perfect. Still, it's going to be, hopefully, good enough. It's going to be close enough. But what you have to remember when you are reading anything which is a translation, that the very fact that it is a translation, and you might be arriving at a conclusion based on an English word that may not be giving you the nuance that you assume that it has. That's why I wanted to share with you some of my experience in translation, not because I'm a great translator, but what I learned from the experience. We don't have enough Orthodox translators of the Fathers in English. We just don't. It is a shame for us that there are more translations being produced by Catholics and now by Protestants than by Orthodox. I know that there are interests in remedying this, but let's face it, we're the ones who say we rely on the Fathers and all this, but it was primarily Catholics who were giving us patristic translations in English, the Catholic University of America Press, their Fathers of the Church series, the Classics of Western Spirituality series by Paulus Press, and other books like by the Cistercian publications and other Catholic publishers. And now, very recently, InterVarsity Press, which is a Protestant publishing house, and other Protestants are putting out translations of patristic texts. We are the ones that should be doing this because we are the ones who are best equipped to understand what that Father is saying, really saying, because they, whether they're Catholics or Protestants, do not have the mind of the early church. It is we who have that. So it's wrong for us not to do more of this work ourselves and produce translations in which we can have more confidence, to tell you the truth. Now, I think the Catholic translations are usually very good. The Fathers of the Church, I'm not saying that they intentionally are mistranslating things, but there's a definite difference when an Orthodox Christian is reading a patristic text than when a Catholic is, especially when you're talking about early church texts, because we live the life of the early church. We worship with the language of the early church, and Catholics don't. And it's not enough just to know the language well. So the same thing with those very famous books, the Nicene and post-Nicene Fathers of the Church series, the Ante-Nicene Fathers of the Church series, those were done in England, but those were done by Protestants. So they're valuable. We're glad that they did them, but let's realize that there's going to be something lacking in the translation, a nuance and understanding that an Orthodox Christian would have provided that simply isn't there if it's done by Catholics with I don't mean this to throw shade on, as they say, or to diminish the work of Catholic or Protestant scholars or their sincere efforts. But I'm telling you this, and I'm going to share with you now from my own experience, okay? So I have to tell you, I have seen some Protestant translations, and I'm very skeptical about relying on them. I hate to say this, but I do have more confidence in the Catholic University of America Press, their publications, the Fathers of the Church, and other Catholic ones. The Protestant ones, I don't think are as reliable. And this is maybe it's not a fair statement, but I'm basing this on the fact that in order to properly translate something, you have to be able to get into the head of the writer. And if you're coming from a theological world in which your concepts of certain basic Christian theology and your understanding of church history and things like this is so different from the people whose writings you're reading, how can you possibly give us an accurate English translation? So I'm not saying that everything is wrong. I'm not saying it's useless. I'm just telling you, as an Orthodox Christian, be careful. Be careful, because people will send me, something one of the fathers said, and they'll say, they get all alarmed. What about this? It says this. Well, I don't know what the Greek word is behind it. I don't know what the context was. I'm not sure if the translator really understood what that father was trying to say. And not every translator is going to be as careful. For us, the fathers are so important. For them, it's an ancient text. They want to have it. They're mining the fathers today, looking for quotes that they can use against the Orthodox. This is what's happening today in the Protestant world. They're looking for quotes from the fathers so that they can justify their own theology. This is happening. Yes, it is. We know that because they're looking for any statement that suggests a belief in penal substitutionary atonement and similar things. And this is what they're trying to do. And Mormons are doing the same thing. Mormons are reading the fathers and they're saying, oh, the fathers taught Mormon doctrine. This is nonsense. But they're manipulating the writings of the fathers. So Catholics are much less likely to do this. Orthodox, of course, are not going to ever do this, because for us, the fathers are so important. They're so revered as authorities. We wouldn't dream of changing their, what they said to suit our theology, because their theology is our theology. So we don't have that kind of motivation. So let me just tell you what happened with myself. When I was looking for a subject for my PhD dissertation, it was suggested to me that I translate the most important patristic commentary on the book of Revelation for the Orthodox, and that was by Andrew of Caesarea. And people weren't exactly sure when he lived, when he wrote the commentary, but it's a very important commentary. It had never been translated into a modern language, not even into modern Greek, actually, surprisingly enough. It existed, besides the original Greek, it existed in Latin, Georgian, Slavonic, and Armenian, but that's it. So this became my job. And the first thing I had to do was to translate this ancient commentary into English, and then I had to analyze it and talk about what he's doing, how he's analyzing the book of Revelation. And this became, eventually that commentary, that translation became this book from the series, the Catholic University of America Press series, Fathers of the Church, commentary, Andrew of Caesarea, commentary on the Apocalypse. This is the Fathers of the Church, volume 123. So I want to show you a little bit about what I was doing, what's involved in something like this. So I had to photocopy the whole thing. This was my working notebook with pages from the commentary. And I've asked Simon to show you page 1 of the commentary. And you can see the title page here of the commentary. He's going to put that up for you. Andrew, Archbishop of Caesarea Cappadocia, interpretation of the Apocalypse of John the theologian. And then you can see some of my little scribbles on there. And then if Simon, you put there page 2, you can see more of my scribbles and my little looking up of various Greek words, okay? Now, this is a critical text. This compilation of this commentary came about when the most famous interpreter, or rather, I should say, textual critic of the book of Revelation went about trying to find the best text of Revelation. So we had spoken about this once before. We talked about, this is what you're seeing here. It's not the book of Revelation. It's the commentary of Andrew. This is his introductory comments on the book of Revelation and his commentary. Later, he would quote the verse and then he would comment on it. So I did the whole book of Revelation as part of the commentary, but I did the book of Revelation as it appeared in his copy, and I analyzed it. But before we get to that, let me tell you how this happened, because this very, very famous person named Joseph Schmid, SCHMID, a German scholar, New Testament scholar in the mid 20th century, He was trying to gather all the copies of the book of Revelation and create a critical text. Go back, figure out how they're related to each other, find the oldest ones, find the most accurate ones, and create that. But just for the book itself. But he found out that 1/3 of all of the Revelation Apocalypse manuscripts were part of the commentary of Andrew of Caesarea. So as part of that work, he just made a critical text of the commentary of Andrew of Caesarea. So it exists in about 100 manuscript copies. And this commentary has become, for the Orthodox, the most important interpretation of the book of Revelation. It is the oldest Greek patristic text, oldest Greek patristic commentary. There's another commentary, also in Greek, that's a little bit older, but it's not patristic. I'm not going to get into that. It's by a fellow named Ecumenius, not the Father Ecumenius. There is a patristic writer, Saint Ecumenius, but this is not him. So this is the oldest Greek patristic commentary. So, of course, you have to go through this, and you have to look at all these words. And the Greek language has very long sentences, and you have to figure out how the different words relate to each other in these various dependent clauses. And after you think you might have the right word for the right for the sentence, you figure out this can't be the right word at all. So you go back to the dictionary. This was my friend, the Liddell Scott Dictionary of Greek. This is the Greek dictionary that I would have to look up, and I looked up every word in this huge dictionary. And sometimes I thought I knew the word that was appropriate for that passage, but it didn't seem to be right. I had to go back and look it up again and find other meanings for the same word in Greek, just like we have in English. Sometimes a word has more than one meaning. Of course, that's the case in Greek too. The other thing that was important was to look in this, the patristic Greek lexicon. And this is basically like a dictionary, but only of patristic Greek. So it wouldn't have words that were prior to the fathers. It wouldn't have anything before, the patristic era. And I'm talking about early church is fine too. But I'm talking about, it wouldn't have Septuagint or things like that. So here's what I found out as I was working through this commentary, word for word and page by page, and translating it. After a while, you get into the head of the author. At first, it's very difficult, but in time, you begin to understand what he's thinking, how he thinks, how he's analyzing this, and how he's presenting this material. I also did a lot of research into the time in which he lived. I came to the conclusion, I actually dated the commentary at the year 611, and there are reasons why I came up with this date. Had a lot to do with the tremendous upheaval at that time in late antiquity, in the Byzantine Empire. There were Persian invasions happening, but it was before the destruction of Jerusalem. This is what I concluded. He was living in the 7th century, and so I was reading a lot about life in the 7th century. For a while, I felt like I was living in the 7th century with the Persian invasions and recent episodes of bubonic plague, and there was a civil war in the empire and things like this. So you have to become part of that world. And you also, remembering that he's a bishop, an archbishop of Caesarea Cappadocia, that was St. Basil the Great See. So Andrew of Caesarea occupied that see about less than 300 years after the time of St. Basil, maybe like 250 years afterwards. What were his responsibilities as a bishop? Why was he asked to write this commentary? Who was he writing it for? Because it was kind of assigned to him. But what happened for me, which was really very interesting, is that as I was reading, I was recognizing a lot of liturgical allusions. I was recognizing little phrases not just from the Bible, because the Bible people know it, and even Schmidt in his footnotes would have references to Bible, but sometimes phrases from hymns, allusions to Orthodox life that somebody who wasn't Orthodox would never have realized, never have recognized, and it was important that not just that I recognize them, because he was relating that particular hymn. He quoted, for example, from a hymn of the Presanctified Divine Liturgy, just a phrase. But that means, and of course, the Presanctified Divine Liturgy existed when he was a bishop in the year 611, when he wrote this commentary. So the fact is that I knew what he was referring to because I recognized the fact that he was quoting from this hymn, and it helped me to understand what his point was. Now, one of the things that was a blessing to me was that I was Greek, and I sang these things in church. I knew them from being in the choir, from singing in Greek. So that was very, very helpful. And also very helpful was the fact that sometimes there are these extremely long sentences in Greek with dependent clauses and clauses on clauses and clauses. And you have to figure out how all the parts of the sentence relate to each other. And sometimes I would just get so lost in the weeds. When they say you can't see the forest for the trees. Well, I definitely couldn't see the forest because I was in the weeds. I was in the trees. Sometimes I would just stop and just read it like a Greek would, like a regular sentence. And all of a sudden, I understood what he was saying because I let it, rather than analyzing, I let it flow into my mind naturally. And so the other thing that I began to see was his style. And of course, his marvelous patristic sensibility, his marvelous pastoral nature that was just so beautiful. He wasn't reading the book and trying to figure out when the end of the world is going to come. Nothing like that. He wasn't applying the events in Revelation to his own time, even though he could have. He was a man of such mature perspective. I just drew to really understand and respect what he was doing as a pastor, the way he was explaining Revelation in a manner that was edifying for the congregation, for the reader, whoever that reader would be. And I have my, sort of ideas about that. I could never prove that, but I think I have a pretty good idea of who it was written for. But the point is, he also gives a lot of different opinions. So he'll quote the different opinions of people, and he puts his own last. And again, this is a sign of remarkable spiritual maturity. He puts his own opinion last. He allows people to have their own opinions. Some of these opinions that he gives are oral transmissions, oral traditions. Some of them are, something Gregory, the theologian, might have said, or Justin Martyr might have said. But he'll quote somebody else. If he really disagrees with it, he won't say that's ridiculous. He'll say, this is unlikely, or some say, but I don't know how they say this. And then he gives what he thinks is the correct interpretation. But usually his interpretation is last. Now, it took me a while his preferred explanation is last. Now, when I read other people who have read this commentary, even the translators, because after mine was published a few months later, this was the first translation of Andrew of Caesarea's commentary in any modern language. 2012, this came out, my translation. A few months later, another translation came out that was done by InterVarsity Press in their little series, the Ancient Christian Texts series. And there were many places when I was reading through that and I'm saying, I don't know how they got at this translation. How did they arrive at this meaning? We're reading the same. They used Joseph Schmid's critical text commentary. They were reading from the same Greek text as I was. And their translation in many places was very different. And I cannot explain why. I do not know why. But I also know that they made mistakes, even though they were the ones who translated this. They made a really big, obvious mistake at the very beginning. At the very beginning of the book of Revelation, it says there's a greeting. from the one who was, is, and is to come, and from the seven spirits who are before his throne, and from the Jesus Christ, the firstborn, of the dead. Now, many people would say that, or at least some people say that the one who was, is, and is to come is the Trinity. Andrew says this at first, but then later he explains why that is incorrect. The people who translated it in InterVarsity Press, they translated that correctly, but they themselves did not realize that he didn't agree with that. That as he progresses on through the discussion of that verse, he explains why that opinion is not correct. But you have to read carefully to understand what was his true opinion and what he was disputing. You don't just read it very quickly. This is the problem with people getting these little snippets of patristic sayings. Sometimes the father is saying something to dispute it. So as a professor, I didn't like it when my students were reading those ancient Christian commentaries where they just took a paragraph from here and a paragraph from there, a paragraph from there. You should read the fathers, the whole passage in its context, so that you can understand his mind, his analysis, his way of thinking, so that you can correctly understand what he's saying and not form the wrong impression. So I was pretty shocked when I read that this is what in the introduction, or somebody was talking about that early passage that Andrew says, that the translators of that other version said that Andrew says the one who was, is, and is to come is the Trinity. No, he does not. But you have to sort of get into his head and understand his pattern, the fact that he gives his opinion at the end. Okay, and then he spends a lot of pages explaining why that is not correct. The one who was, is, and is to come at that place is the Father. And he explains why. Anyhow, so I want you to understand that I kind of went through this, and I struggled with words, and I tried to find the best word. And it's just a very complicated and difficult effort to be involved in the work of translation. And I lived with that for a long time. I think it took me, I started around, I think it was 1996 or 98. And I graduated in 2007. I defended my dissertation. So it was a long time. It was about 10 years or more that I worked with on this particular version. Anyhow, I wanted to share that with you so that you can understand that it's not simply enough to be an expert in Greek. Thankfully, I had Father Costa around. I used to pick his brain sometimes. Thank God, he was wonderful. And my Greek is not the best. I'm not a classic scholar. I'm not like people who've had, like Father Costa had, 15, 16, 17 years of Greek from the time he was a little kid. Every kind of Greek, Homeric Greek and classical Greek and patristic Greek, he had every kind of Greek. I never had that. But what I did was I spent time with this one person, and he became somebody that I came to know and understand and follow his thought process. And that's different from somebody, and especially to be part of his world, not only to learn about life in the late 6th, early 7th centuries, what life was like for a bishop at that time, what was happening historically, but also I was part of his world as an Orthodox Christian. It resonated with me. The way he spoke, the way he conveyed concepts, the way he quoted the fathers, everything about it was 100% Orthodox. It was what somebody would say today. And it's remarkable to me. And so I was very at home with this commentary and with this person, because we breathe the same air. We breathe the air of the ancient church. We breathe the air of the fathers. We are part of the same church. And I really felt that. And somebody who wasn't Orthodox would never feel that and would not be able to understand it the way somebody who was Orthodox, who shared that theology, that mentality, the love for the fathers, the liturgical life, the sacramental life. Person who doesn't share that the way he does with him would not be able to render those things or understand those things, I think, in the way he intended them. So let's take a break right now. And when we return, We're going to talk about translations, some of the more controversial translations. We're going to go through some passages, and I think you're going to find it very interesting. So join me after the break.
Crucifixion and resurrection of Christ are central events in our salvation. Yet few Christians have a good grasp of the first-century historical and religious context in which the crucifixion took place, nor of its true significance for the people of that time, and hence for our time as well. In her book, The Crucifixion of the King of Glory, biblical scholar Dr. Jeannie Constantinou puts modern readers in the center of the events of Christ's Passion, bringing the best of modern scholarship to bear while keeping her interpretation faithful in every particular to the early church tradition. If you love Search the Scriptures live on Ancient Faith Radio, you'll also love The Crucifixion of the King of Glory, available now at store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com.
Okay, so we had a question come in. First, what was the InterVarsity Press translation different in negative ways? You know, it's been so long since I went through it to compare it to my own that I don't remember necessarily, but to me, it's negative if it's not accurate, okay? And I didn't think, obviously, I'm going to think that mine is more accurate than what they put out. But if this happens in one translation, can it happen in all the patristic translations? With this principle in mind, who is checking the accuracy of the translators? Well, there are editors who look over these things, or they're supposed to look over them. I don't know. Obviously, it's going to depend upon each editor how carefully they check. But it's not like translations of the Bible where you have a committee of 30 or 40 or 50 people working together and checking each other's translation. You don't have that. You have one translator like me, and then you have an editor who might go over it. They might have somebody else perhaps review it. Mine wasn't just the Catholic University of America Press that went over it, but it was part of my dissertation. So I had 3 people who read my dissertation and looked at all of my translations. So in my case, I had multiple eyes on that. But my point is this: I'm not trying to suggest that you shouldn't trust any translations. I'm just telling you, be careful not to be so quick, especially if something strikes you as off. And you, as an Orthodox Christian, if you have the Orthodox phronema, the mind of the church, and you read something and somebody says, oh, Chrysostom was teaching substitutionary atonement because he said this and the such, and they quote a couple of sentences from Chrysostom, you should know, as an Orthodox Christian, if you haven't developed that phronema yet, over time you will. If you're new to the church, it's going to take you a while, but there's something about it. There's something intuitive about it. Orthodox Christians know when something is right or when something seems off. So the other question is, where do we find these original patristic writings? Well, they're in huge collections in libraries, usually theological libraries. And there's a Patrologia Greca, which has volumes and volumes and volumes, and then of Greek patristic writings. And then there's Patrologia Latina for the Latin fathers. And then there are some other places which might publish. Sometimes you'll see the original text on one side and the translation on the other side, but most of the time they don't do that. But, even something like Patrologia Greca, that has a version of Andrew of Caesarea's commentary, but it's not as good as Schmidt's critical text, because Schmidt got all 100 copies of Andrew's commentary, and he looked to see which was the original, which ones had more errors in the copying, etc. So not all of them have a critical text, but that is one of the things that has to be done. So what can I say? All right, that answers that. So before we go on to talk about translations, what is the difference between a translation and a version? Do you remember? A translation refers to the language. Version refers to how the biblical text is rendered in that language. So the Bible in English exists in many versions. Now, today, there are so many different versions of the Bible in English. We can't even begin to discuss all of them, and I don't think it's all that necessary. But the Bible is constantly being revised. People are coming out with new versions, and that's because there are a couple of reasons. First of all, the English language keeps changing. And also, we learn more as there are more discoveries of sometimes archaeological discoveries that shed light on the meaning of certain passages. There are also far more copies, manuscript copies that exist today than, let's say, the men had who did the King James Version in 1611. So as there are more discoveries, even discoveries that are not necessarily of biblical texts, for example, if there's a discovery of a lot of papyrus receipts, or there might be a discovery of a couple of marriage contracts. And these things are usually discovered in very arid climates like in Egypt or Jordan or places like this. They might find something and they've only survived 2,000 years because they're in a very dry climate. So when they find these writings, if they're in the Greek language, because here in the New Testament, we're talking about the Greek language, and they find these writings, believe it or not, they find Jewish writings in the Greek language all the time. And one of these that was found recently was a marriage contract. And it was a marriage contract for a rather wealthy woman. And this was in Greek, even though it's a ketubah, which is a marriage contract for Jews. So when they find things like that, sometimes there are words that are used in them, and that helps us to understand how that word was used at that time, let's say the first century or the era of the early church. So when those discoveries are made, it's just one little drop. You have to think of it. It's a mountain of knowledge, but that mountain of knowledge was created by one little bit at a time. One little stone, one little pebble keeps adding to the mountain of knowledge that helps us to, every little bit helps us to understand better. So the living language, of course, English as a living language changes, and words and expressions don't necessarily carry the same meaning from one generation to a next. Sometimes something is offensive in a particular generation and not so much in a later generation, or vice versa. Something might be considered very dignified or very majestic and be meaningless to a person in another generation. We mentioned that last time. Suffer the children to come unto me. Well, we're not asking for children to suffer. It means allow. Let the children come to me. But that's how it was expressed in 1611. So the King James Bible, which was considered a masterpiece of the English language, was using the English of its time in 1611. This is the one that has the these and thous and verbs that end with eth, cometh, goeth, giveth, taketh. That's how people spoke. So apparently somebody wrote to explain this to me, and I said this last week. So maybe you guys are, washing the dishes or doing something else while you're listening. I don't know, but not everybody's paying attention. So I said this last week. That was the language of the time. Thee and thou, that was not formal English. It was everyday common English. The Greek of the New Testament is written in exactly that style, everyday common English. But because we don't use thee and thou today, we think of that as very formal. We think of it as very religious, very churchy. It seems more appropriate to address God with thee and thou. Many of us feel like we have to address God more respectfully, but the Greek of the Bible is not written like that. The Greek of the Bible is very informal. It's koine Greek, kini Greek, which means common. Kini. Okay? The Kini Greek of the New Testament is the Greek of the New Testament. The New Testament Greek is called Keni Diatheke. Somebody called to correct me about that too. I know that. Keni means new. I'm not talking about New Testament Keni. I'm talking the word Kini. Kapo omikron iota. Ki means common. The common Greek, not the new Greek, the common Greek. And this is the word that we use. In Greek, they say koine. In English, they say koine. But in Greek, we say kini, new. Okay, not new, I'm sorry, not new, but common. Okay, so the point is this. The way the Bible was written is it was written by the evangelists and Paul and the other apostles in very simple Greek of the time. Remember what I told you about the Vulgate? The word Vulgate comes from the word that in Latin that means common. That's why we get the word vulgar for something that is low. It's common. Doesn't mean dirty. It meant common. So the Bible is not intended to be written in a formal manner. The Bible is not stuffy. The Bible is not pretentious. And so it shouldn't be translated in that way. I know a lot of people feel like, oh, well, we have to speak to God as thou and thee and thine, but actually that's not true. Okay, so anyhow, let's go on. So after 1611, as time passed, that language fell out of use. We don't speak like that anymore. They didn't even speak like that, in the 18th century, let alone the 19th century, the 20th century. So over the course of time, people's style of speaking and writing changed. More and more manuscripts, Greek manuscripts, were discovered, and they had many more manuscripts to translate the New Testament from than they had in 1611. So in the late 19th century, that's the 1800s, remember, they began to come up with a more updated version of the New Testament, the American Standard Version and the Revised Version in English. And then in the 20th century, a lot of scholars started working on what would become the Revised Standard Version. And that came about in the 1950s. It was completed, the whole Bible, in 1952. And that was the one, it was kind of a multi-Christian effort, and it was done by a lot of scholars. And that was the one that was used by the majority of Christians, unless they were using the King James Version. So, and that was kind of the one that became the default version for Orthodox Christians, the Revised Standard Version. It retains a lot of the order of words, more of a literal pattern of words, but it removes the these and the thous, except in the Psalms. Many of our prayer books, our Divine Liturgy service books, other service books are using the RSV. Okay, so if you're talking about the Psalms, they tend to keep the these and thous. I don't know why. I guess because it's hymns, they thought it was more poetic. I don't know. Now, even that started to feel a little bit antiquated. So toward the end of the last century, they created the new Revised Standard, NRSV, which they felt needed to be a little bit more free, a little bit more of a rendering that was more contemporary, not quite so archaic. And they really felt like the Revised Standard had kept a lot of that churchy language. And so they also tried to make it, without being super inclusive, they wanted to be sort of cognizant of the fact that today when we say men and man and mankind, we mean women too. Of course, we always knew that before. That was never a big issue when we were growing up, but now people are more sensitive to that. Now, the new King James Version came about. It's not really a complete update of the King James. They wanted to make an update of the King James Version to take out the these and the thous, but they ended up also changing some other things in it too. It's not really based on King James. Now, last time I told you that there is a tension between what the translator is trying to do. You could either have a literal translation or one that is more literal. It's never going to be perfectly literal. It's never going to be perfectly accurate. or you can have one that is more dynamic, in which they're a little bit more contemporary. They're less concerned about matching word for word. And so that there's that tension between the literal and the dynamic. Now, when it's more literal, it's more accurate. When it's more dynamic, it's less accurate. And when it's less accurate, that means that the translators have included their opinion of what it means, because they have interjected, they have added words. I'm not suggesting they're doing something nefarious, anything that's, evil or anything like that, but they're trying to help you understand the proper meaning of that word. So one very good example we used last time when we were talking about the wedding at Cana, when Jesus's mother says they've run out of wine, and Jesus says literally, "What to me and to you, woman?" to his mother. So how are we going to know how to translate this? Well, you can have, I read you a lot of different variations on how to render this. Some of them were more literal and some were very dynamic. Now, some of them said, "What is concern is that to you and to me? What business is this of ours? Why turn to me?" Some of them said. The New International Version said, "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" Well, the word involve is not there, and the word dear is not there. Why did the translator include the word dear when Jesus was speaking to his mother, instead of just saying, "Woman, why do you involve me?" Or why is that your concern? Because in English, just to address a woman as woman sounds very harsh. And people clearly were saying, in the Protestant camp, of course, that Jesus did not respect his mother, because he addressed her as woman. So in order to soften the sound of that, they added the word dear. And routinely in the New International Version, it's a more dynamic version, but it's still, a fairly good translation. It's more readable, but they add a lot of explanatory words. For example, rather than saying in the Old Testament, if you touch this object, you shall be unclean until sunset, or you must perform this sacrifice and you will be unclean. They add the word ceremonially unclean. Well, the word ceremonially is not there, okay? But they add that so that you will understand that the people are not physically unclean. So they felt the need to add these. So the more dynamic a translation is, the less it follows the Greek word order, the Greek actual words, and the more they're inclined to add words that are kind of explanatory. And I'm not suggesting that it's not called for some of the time. But even within that dynamic range, there's a pretty wide range of contemporary contemporary versions, and some of them are more reliable and others are way too dynamic. They're taking a lot of license, a lot of liberties with the biblical text these days, because now the next step from a translation, which is either literal or kind of as close to literal as possible, and that would be things like the King James, the New King James, the New American Bible, that's the Catholic Bible today that's preferred, the Revised Standard, the New Revised Standard. Those versions are more on the literal side. You have the more dynamic ones like the Jerusalem Bible, like the New International Bible, but they're still keeping pretty much to the text. The most recent development that we see in the past a few decades is what's called dynamic equivalence. It's no longer word for word or phrase for phrase, but thought for thought. And basically, it's a paraphrase. I don't call those translations. You're no longer translating words. You're no longer translating what Paul actually wrote, what Luke actually wrote. You're translating what you think they thought, what they were trying to convey. And that can be very, very dangerous. And this is the new trend. And there are a lot of new paraphrases. And I will tell you, so let me tell you about some of them. let me tell you about some of the things that I was, let me see if I can give you some, now, one of them, the Good News translation. This is something, by the way, I'm not necessarily opposed to this. This came out in 1960s. This was very popular, the Good News version. The Good News Bible, also called Today's English Version. This is a paraphrase, all right? It's using dynamic equivalents, and they're not trying to render it word for word. In our little story last week, when Jesus said, Jesus' mother said they've run out of wine, in this version, his response to her, rather than, what is that to me and to you, woman, his response was, you shall not tell me what to do. Do not tell me what to do, which is, you can see that's not any effort to translate what the author actually wrote. It's a thought. They're translating what they think Jesus thought. So this could be very, very problematic. Okay, now, that having been said, this is the Bible that Father Costa used, okay? So this is a dynamic equivalent. He used it in Bible studies, parish Bible studies, Good News translation, Good News for Modern Man. This is what we had in a lot of our parishes. Some of you might recognize this. It says, come receive the light, but that's this version. By the way, how do you know which version it is? This was put out because this version, the Good News for Modern Man, Today's English Version, was done by the American Bible Society. So this was published by the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese. And so this is the first sort of Orthodox Bible that we had in English, but the version, they didn't do the translation. They took the version that was done by the American Bible Society, and they put in here some Orthodox comments and notes at the back and things like that. But this is what we had as teenagers, all right? And this is what Father Costa used in his Bible studies and had as pew Bibles. Now, I didn't like that very well, even though, because it's a paraphrase. I'll give you one other one. It's a paraphrase. But he said to me, and he was right, that at Father Costa's parish Bible studies, there were people who were not native English speakers. And this version or paraphrase done by the American Bible Society is supposed to be at 6th grade reading level. So it's designed for people who are younger, for children, for teenagers, for people whose English is not their first language. And so this is why he was using it, and people could read it and understand it. And I have to tell you, this is the Bible that I was reading as a teenager because I could understand it. So when people say to me, what's the best translation? I say, it's the one that you're going to read. So even though it's a paraphrase, it's not too bad as compared to what you're going to see we're going to talk about later as we go through the program. Some of them are pretty outrageous. This actually seems very tame by comparison, all right? And by the way, here's another one. How do you know which version is your Bible? You might have a Bible and you say, well, I don't know, I just have the Orthodox Study Bible. You're on the cover page of every Bible. It will say Holy Bible or something like this. And then usually at the bottom, it says here, Today's English Version. That's the version. It will say Holy Bible, King James Version or Authorized Version, or Holy Bible, Revised Standard Version. Look at the title page and it's going to tell you exactly what version you are using. So this is something I bought in Canada. Whenever we go to Quebec City, we like to go to the Canadian Bible Society. They have a store there on Rue Saint-Jean, and this is the hockey player's New Testament. So, of course, I had to have it, not because I play hockey, but I was just intrigued by it. So it has little sort of testimonies by hockey players about their faith and whatnot. So what version is it? It's got pictures of hockey players. You know, this would appeal to Canadians, of course, but a lot of you on the East Coast, too, for whom hockey is a really big thing. And by the way, it's Hockey Ministries International. So what version is it? Look, it's put out by the Canadian Bible Society, and there it is. It's the Good News translation. Okay, So it doesn't matter how it's packaged. That's my point. Different versions are packaged or marketed to different groups of people, students, to women, to men, to hockey players, So you have to look at the front page, to see who it's for. So this is what I was reading as a teenager. This is what my mother bought. These books this is a 10-volume series. These are Bible story books. My mother, I have to tell you, here it is. Oh, here is Ramses. Pharaoh, the story of Moses. This is the story of Moses. 10 volumes, and this was color in the 1960s. Very expensive. My father didn't want her to buy it. So one of the rare times my mother insisted on buying this, and my father said, because she wanted us to read the Bible. But we're not going to sit and read the King James version of the Bible. So she bought us these Bible story books, and we read them. This is where I learned almost all of my Old Testament stories from, these storybooks. And they were really beautiful. And back in the day, so a lot of you remember, we didn't have pictures in books. And if we did, they certainly weren't in color. So this was a very, very beautiful set of books that we read a lot. So there's nothing wrong with this kind of a thing, especially for children or anybody who wants to know about the Bible. It's okay to read stories, Bible story books. When I was in high school and college, this was my Bible. My favorite all-time Bible, and you could see it's seen its better days. I went to a Catholic girls' high school and a Catholic college. This was the version that they had at the time. This was before they had the New American Bible. They were using the Jerusalem Bible. And I loved it because it had lots of space for writing and lots of notes and lots of cross-references. And I absolutely, because then once I get to the New Testament, it's really falling apart. I liked it, but the version was not very accurate. It's more dynamic. And but this is the one that we had to have for school, and I carried it everywhere. I used it a lot, and it literally fell apart. Father Costa bought me a new one, and I started graduate school, and we were reading in class, and we had a conversation with my professor. He says, you really need something that's more accurate. I said, I know, but I like my Bible because it had big wide margins and thick paper, and I could write and all over it, and had really nice references and notes. And finally, we were in class once, and we were reading from the Gospel of John. I'll never forget it. And my professor said, you have to get another Bible. And I knew it. But I was a little bit heartbroken. I looked for another Bible that had all these features that I liked. I never found it. Here's the new one Father Costa bought for me, but I ended up not using it because my professor said it's just not accurate, and they were right. So I end up with my Revised Standard Version, Greek English, and that's what I've been using ever since. Now, what should you never use? Never use this. The New World Translation, which is the Jehovah's Witness version of the Bible, because it's not really a translation that's intended to be objective and accurate. They're just trying to promote their own doctrine. So you're never going to use this. So let's continue. We're going to talk more about some contemporary versions, and we're going to go through some actual passages so you can see how they sound differently. We have to take a break right now, so join me after the break.
Journey back to the 6th century and join Saint Brendan on his 7-year seafaring adventure. Will sea monsters and erupting volcanoes keep him from reaching the promised land of saints? The Voyage of Saint Brendan, a new graphic novel from Ancient Faith Kids, now available at store.ancientfaith.com.
Okay, somebody asked a question about how Genesis 47:31 is used by the fathers to defend venerating icons, but translations say Jacob bowed on the staff. I'm not familiar with this argument or whatnot, but when you also have to remember that the fathers are using the Septuagint. Okay, so when you're reading the Old Testament, very often what you're reading, because if you're reading an English Bible, it's almost always translated from the Masoretic text, which is not the Hebrew of Jesus's time. I explained that already. That was a version that was created by Jewish scholars 1,000 years ago. And it doesn't always match up with the Septuagint. The Septuagint is much older. The Septuagint is 1,200 years older than the Hebrew version that was created 1,000 years ago with a particular point of view by these people who wanted to standardize the meaning of the Hebrew. So we can't say that the fathers had nothing, they didn't know anything about the Masoretic text. It didn't exist. Even the Hebrew Bible, we have to remember, was not being always copied with the kind of exactitude that exists today for Torah scribes who are copying the Bible. So I can't answer that. So, but there are certainly very old understandings of the meaning of Bible passages that you find in the fathers that are highly dependent on the Septuagint. Now, remember that the Septuagint was translated by Jews. And when they translated it, they were translated what they understood the Hebrew to mean. So you can't say, well, that's Greek, so it doesn't count. No. Because the Jewish scholars who translated the Hebrew Bible of their day, 250 BC, were telling us what they believed it meant. So if the fathers are saying that that's what it is in Greek, there might be something to that. That might have been the way it was understood by the Jews before Christ. Do you see my point? Okay, so we have a number of contemporary paraphrases. There's another one, contemporary English version, which is the Good News for Modern Man, is designed for people to be reading at a 6th grade level. There's another one that's at a 4th grade level, contemporary English version, that's done by the American Bible Society. Again, it's like a thought for thought. That's not, again, it's not necessarily wrong. And I think the Bible Society is pretty trustworthy, although it's heavily influenced by Protestants. At least the Good News translation, most of the time it's within, we could say, the realm of acceptable meanings. But you have to remember, this is a translation, or this is even just a paraphrase that might not be, the impression that I receive from reading it might not be correct. So you don't jump to conclusions or make theological conclusions based on that. You just have to be careful, that's all. There's another one that came about in the 2011 called the Common English Bible, which is, again, thought for thought. And guess what? It's gender inclusive. So you know that was going to happen. And this is the one that's most popular today among mainstream Protestant denominations. And instead of using Son of Man, they refer to Jesus as the human one, which I think is pretty funny. A United Methodist, Presbyterians, Episcopal Church, they are using this version, the Common English Bible. The one that has been very, very popular for Protestants up till this time, and revised, let me see if I could find it here, is the New International Version. New International Version. Okay, here's one, NIV Study Bible. This one was put out by the American Bible Society. I used to have my college students get this. I wish it's called the Learning Bible. Again, the Learning Bible. Oh, Learning Bible. What kind of Bible is it? Look at the first page. It's going to tell you. Okay, what is the version? Oh, they call it the Learning Bible. That's how they market it. But at the bottom here, or here in the middle, it says New International Version. New International Version. So you can see that. Now, I liked this particular one, even though it's not as accurate. The New International is more dynamic. It was easy for my college students to understand, and it had a lot of notes. It had explanatory notes, but unfortunately, I don't think they publish it anymore. Now, along with that, you have others. again, Protestant New International Version. This was the most, this was the one that was desired, New International. This is called the Serendipity Bible. It's more for group discussions. But again, it's still the same version. So it's not like when people are packaging these Bibles, they're coming up with a brand new translation every time. But that's New International. Now, there's also a revised, new revised international version. Here's one, the Revised Standard. So after the Revised Standard version, the Revised Standard kept some of the characteristics of the King James Version. So they came out with Revised Standard. Again, this is just marketing. The People's Bible, you can imagine, is supposed to be multicultural, and they don't change the translation. What they have inside are little notes that try to talk about, different groups of people, marginalized peoples, and things like this. Here's another one. Another study Bible. This one is put out by the Society of Biblical Literature. It's New Revised Standard. You have Catholic Bibles, New American Bible, College Study Bible, Anselm Academic. It's also the New American. So they package them in different ways, but it's all a certain version of the Bible. They're not creating brand new versions. What's happening lately is that there's more of by the way, because the New International Version is more dynamic and less accurate, I think that bothered some Protestant scholars. So they came up with a new one called the English Standard Version. It's done by Protestants, but it's more literal. So for example, the "what to me and to you, woman," that the New International Version had, "Dear woman, what concern is that to you and me?" That kind of a thing that adds the word concern, adds the word dear. The English Standard Version is a bit more literal, and they want to have that sort of, we could say, somewhat of a formality that we feel when we read the King James Version or the Revised Standard Version. But it's more fluid. It's not quite as stuffy and stilted or difficult to follow, because Revised Standard and King James, they try to keep the Greek word order and the phrasing as closely as they can to the Greek. And that's why sometimes it sounds very different from modern English. So what's happening today is people are trying to create versions that are actually paraphrases and wildly different from what the original Greek says. And one of them that has been very, very popular is called The Message. And this is a paraphrase. It should not be called a translation. It's a paraphrase done by one person. But prior to this, the Living Bible was a paraphrase that was done by one person. And now, of course, there's a New Living Bible. But a paraphrase is, again, not even necessarily just thought for thought. They're trying to tell you, they're just putting it in their own words. So this is even more removed from just a dynamic translation. And it's very problematic, because if a dynamic translation causes the translator to interject his ideas into it, this is what I think they're saying, and we want to be sure the reader understands it properly, so they interject their own words, or they, by the choice of word, they influence how you read it. You can imagine how a paraphrase does that, okay? So there's this one called The Message by Eugene Peterson. He says it has wide support by universities and seminaries. I don't know why, because it's not a translation. Don't ever use that, okay? It's one person's interpretation, and he's paraphrased the Bible. Now, the most recent one, which is getting a lot of attention and is really, some people love it. The person who claims he did it, is called the Passion Translation. It's the work of one person, Brian Simmons, calls himself the lead translator, but in fact, he's the only translator. He claims to use Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic texts, but we're talking about the New Testament here. He hasn't come out with the Old Testament. The New Testament is not in Hebrew. The New Testament is not in Aramaic, but only in Greek. And he wanted to create something kind of exciting. And he tried to create a Bible that would express God's fiery heart of love to this generation, merging the emotion and the life-changing truth of God's word. The hope for the Passion Translation, this I'm reading from their website, is to trigger inside every reader an overwhelming response to the truth of the Bible and to reveal the deep mysteries of the scriptures in the love language of God, the language of the heart. Here's the problem. It's not a translation. It's a paraphrase. And he takes a lot of liberty. It's more than a paraphrase because he just adds a lot of things that aren't even close to being there. And the second thing is, this is the work of one person. So there's nobody checking him. And of course, I'm sure he's making a fortune off of this. There's no team of translators checking what he did. He says that it's based on, I said, Aramaic. What he has done is he's tried to imagine what people would have said in Aramaic, and then he says he tries to render that into the English. I don't know how anybody can do that. He also says he's used the Syriac, but the Syriac version of the Bible, the Peshitta, came along about 400 years after the time of Christ. So that's not, really basing what you're saying Jesus said or thought according to the times of the first century. But the most problematic thing with this one, which is called the Passion Translation, is that he claims that the Lord came to him in a vision and touched his head and enlarged his brain. Now, he doesn't say this anymore on his website, but he used to. And some early interviews with this person, Brian Simmons, he said this. Now he's walked it back, as we say. Now he's reluctant to say that because it sounds so creepy. The Lord touched his head and enlarged his brain so he could understand the Bible better than anyone. He also said that an angel visited him and guided his translation. So you could see how problematic this is. This is a person who has a spiritual delusion, or even worse. But it's sold a lot of copies and a lot of people like it. But this is not the Bible. The more we get it away from a word for word, or close as possible to a word for word, the less we're talking about the Bible. Is this the Bible anymore? If it's somebody's paraphrase or somebody's thoughts about what they think Jesus meant by this or what Paul meant by this, at a certain point, it stops being the Bible. So you can't tell me you're reading the Bible if you're reading the Message or the Passion Translation. You're reading something else. So other considerations that we have are considerations of gender. And that's just a fact of life, that the masculine was the default gender. That was the case when I was growing up. When they said mankind, women didn't get upset and say, oh, we're not included. We just knew that we were included. And even in Greek, it's the word anthropos. It means human being. A woman will say "ime anthropos" in Greek. It means I'm a person or I'm a human being. We don't change the gender of the word to meet women. To reflect that it's a woman, it's the same. It's a masculine word, whether it's a woman or a man. But in today, people get very touchy about these things. And so the other thing is, when we read the epistle in church, it happened yesterday. I was in church and the epistle reader gets up to read. He always says brethren, and then he says both brethren and then brothers and sisters. Or he'll say brothers and sisters and then says brethren, because that's how it reads in the epistle, in our lectionary. So should that be changed? What do we mean by brethren? Let's take a look at, I'm going to have Simon put something up to show you some of the problems that happen when we try to change that word. For millennia, women all knew that they were included in the masculine language. Now, you can argue that that's inappropriate. It sort of excludes women, or it makes them second class or something. But when we begin to tinker with the Bible to make people feel more comfortable, like they're included, even though they should know that they're included. I mean, we used to say, everyone must turn in his paper by the end of the day. It didn't mean that the girls didn't have to turn, that his was the default. Now we're so uncomfortable with that we say everyone must turn in their paper. Well, there is plural. It really isn't good English. We know that, but this is how our language is changing. Because rather than saying his or her paper, which really what we should say, people are using the plural to include everybody. And this is what's happened. So let's take a look at the first line of Psalm 133. The King James Version says, "Behold, how good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity." Revised Standard, "Behold, how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell in unity." New Revised Standard, "How very good and pleasant it is when kindred live together in unity." Even that is problematic. What do we mean by brethren? Does brethren mean people who are related to each other? Or does it mean people who are part of the same group or tribe or the church? Because it can. New International Version, "How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity." Now, this one is suggesting that it has to do with the congregation of faith. Today's English Version, this is the good news. "How wonderful it is, how pleasant for God's people to live together in harmony." Oh, here's a message. How wonderful, how beautiful when brothers and sisters get along. I'm sorry. Okay, this one, again, get along. It sounds like how you used to argue with your siblings, and the Bible's saying you shouldn't do that, but this is not really talking about that. Brothers and sisters getting along. Okay, who are the brothers and sisters? Is it the community of faith? Is it the church? Is it the synagogue, since it's the psalm? Is it people? Is it everybody in society? Who is being referred to here? And can you see how you can get a different idea of what it means depending on how that's translated? Okay, here's another one for having to do with the word anthropos. And this is from Psalm 8, verse 4. King James, "What is a man that thou art mindful of him?" One of the most beautiful verses, I think, of the Bible. "And the Son of Man that thou visitest him." Okay, that's why we don't use the King James. I can't even pronounce it. Here's the Revised Standard. Now notice the Revised Standard kept the these and the thous in the Psalms. "What is man that thou art mindful of him? And the Son of Man that thou dost care for him?" New Revised Standard, "What are human beings that you are mindful of them? Mortals that you care for them." Now, the man part became mortals. New International, "What is mankind that you are mindful of them?" What is the problem there? Mankind is singular. Them is plural. And why didn't he at least say humankind if he's going to make that change? "Human beings that you care for them." Today's English Version, "What are human beings that you think of them, mere mortals, that you care for them?" Here's the message. "Why do you bother with us? Why take a second look our way?" Okay. Can you see? This is not a paraphrase. Okay, today's English Version, that's the good news for modern man. You can say that that's a paraphrase, all right? It's not word for word, but it's not that far off the mark. The message is completely off the mark. This is not the Bible anymore, my dear people, okay? So whenever we're changing and trying to be sensitive to gender, changing from man to human to persons to human beings, it's a problem because it becomes awkward. If we might change it to the singular, then we have to use it. We're changing it from human to mortal, and the word mortal really refers to our mortality. And even though mortals means human, sometimes not. Something else can be mortal and not be a human. Okay. Let's take a look at Matthew chapter 16, verse 24. Revised Standard Version, "If any man would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." So I suppose as a woman, that doesn't apply to me. You see, we didn't used to bother over these things before. We didn't get offended by these things, and at least it was accurate. Now, here's the NRSV, New Revised Standard. They're trying to be more sensitive to the gender issue. And I'm not saying that we should never be, but sometimes we need to leave things alone. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves. You notice how it went from singular to plural, and take up their cross and follow me. Their cross. It sounds like everybody has one cross that we're all sharing. Can you see the problem there? Contemporary English Bible. All who want to come after me must say no to themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Here's the good news, today's English version. Then Jesus said to his disciples, if any of you want to come with me, you must forget yourself, carry your cross, and follow me. You know, that's not so terrible. Here's the message. That Jesus went to work on his disciples. Anyone who intends to come with me has to let me lead. You're not in the driver's seat. I am. Don't run from suffering. Embrace it. Follow me, and I'll show you how. Self-help is no help at all. Self-sacrifice is the way, my way, to finding yourself, your true self. What kind of deal is it to get everything you want but lose yourself? What could you ever trade your soul for? Oh my God. You can see the problem here. Now, here's the first time I'm quoting from The Message. The Message. Then Jesus said to his disciples, the passage rather, if you truly want to follow me, you should at once completely reject and disown your own life. You must be willing to share my cross and experience it as your own, as you continually surrender your ways. By the way, there was something else I was going to show you. Where did it go? Oh, yeah. All right. So here's the message. This is the message. Oh, my God. Now, there are sometimes when a paraphrase, like I said, I was reading The Good News for Modern Man as a teenager, and I liked it because I could understand it. That is not necessarily, there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. So we have to remember that this is okay in certain settings, as long as people understand that they're reading the story, that they're not reading an accurate translation. So I'm going to show you another paraphrase that I bought a long time ago. The Black Bible Chronicle series, Rappin' with Jesus. Rappin' with Jesus. Okay, and it's a good news according to the four brothers, and this was done by an African American woman, P.K. McCary. She calls herself an interpreter. Good for her. She's not a translator. She's taking what the scriptures say and trying to put it into the lingo of people who are living in the inner cities, African American youth in the inner cities. And again, if you're going to have something like The Message or the Passion Translation, which is a very free, not even paraphrase, restatement of whatever they think it's saying, there's nothing wrong with this, certainly. Okay, so I'll give you an example. I was looking for the same section, but I can't find it. It has to be I was looking for the same one, but maybe I'll find it later. At any rate, I'll read it to you in a little bit. Okay, Rapping with Jesus. So let's take a look at some other versions and paraphrases. Psalm 23, because we all are very familiar with this. King James Version. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. This is real poetry, isn't it? Here's the New King James Version. So notice that what they've done is taken out the these and the thous. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Oh, I'm sorry. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. The Revised Standard is exactly the same, except it says, thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Here's the New International Version. Again, this is a dynamic version, but it's not bad. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing, rather than I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So here's the Good News Bible, the Today's English Version. This is the one that's for people who are like a 6th grade reading level, people for whom English is not, either they're very young, teenagers or whatever, or their English is not their native language. The Lord is my shepherd. I have everything I need. He lets me rest in fields of green grass and leads me to quiet pools of fresh water. He gives me new strength. He guides me in the right paths, as he has promised. Even though I go through the deepest darkness, I will not be afraid. Lord, for you are with me. Your shepherd's rod and staff protect me. So that's a paraphrase, but it's a pretty good one. It's not going far afield. It's not a translation. It's a paraphrase. It's not a version. It's a paraphrase. Here's a Living Bible. We haven't read from this one yet. And this is a paraphrase done by one person. Because the Lord is my shepherd, I have everything I need. He lets me rest in the meadow grass and leads me beside the quiet streams. You can see that they're adding more thoughts, right? More of their own ideas. He gives me new strength. He helps me to do what honors him the most. Even when walking through the dark valley of death, I will not be afraid, for you are close by me, guarding and guiding all the way. Here is the message. God, my shepherd, I don't need a thing. You have bedded me down in lush meadows. You find me quiet pools to drink from. True to your word, you let me catch my breath and send me in the right direction. Even when the way goes through Death Valley, I'm not afraid. When you walk at my side, your trusty shepherd's crook makes me feel secure. Okay, so here's the Passion Translation. Yahweh is my best friend and my shepherd. I always have more than enough. He offers a resting place for me in his luxurious love. His tracks take me to an oasis of peace under the quiet brook of bliss. That's where he restores and revives my life. He opens before me the right path and leads me along in his footsteps of righteousness so that I can bring honor to his name. Even when your path takes me through the valley of deepest darkness, fear will never conquer me, for you already have. Your authority is my strength and my peace. The comfort of your love takes away my fear. I'll never be lonely, for you are near. Now, we have a little bit more to do. I hope you'll bear with me. I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am. We're going to take another break at this point. We'll probably go for like another 10 or 15 minutes. I also want to talk to you about some of the Orthodox New Testaments, and I'm going to read to you from Rapping with Jesus. Okay, and we're going to, when we come back from our break, we're going to read the Lord's Prayer in these different versions. And also, we're going to read the prologue of John's Gospel, and you'll get a sense also of how these people present it and the good points and the bad points of various versions and also these paraphrases, okay? So let's take one more break and stick with me after the break.
So here's a question for you. What does it mean to think Orthodox? What are the unspoken and unexplored premises and presumptions underlying what Christians believe? Orthodox Christianity is based on preserving the mind of the early church, its phronima. Dr. Jeannie Constantinou brings her more than 40 years' experience as a professor, Bible teacher, and speaker to bear in explaining what the Orthodox phronima is, how it can be acquired, and how that phronima is expressed in true Orthodox theology, as practiced by those who are properly qualified by both training and a deep relationship with Christ. Thinking Orthodox, now available at store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com.
Okay, so I found the passage in Rapping with Jesus where Jesus says, anyone who wishes to come after me, let him pick up his cross, deny himself, pick up his cross, and follow me. So this is how this particular interpreter interpreted it. Look, I ain't said it was going to be easy, but any brother who wants to follow me is going to have to suffer too. And if you lose your life here on earth, you'll live forever in eternity with me. What happens when a brother ends up with everything silver and gold, but loses his soul? Tell me, how much is your soul worth? When I rise after they waste me, I'm coming with my Father, the Almighty, and giving out something worth more than gold. And I'm telling you, there'll be those who wished they were already dead when I come here. That's when he says they will not see death before they see the kingdom of heaven coming in power. But actually, in terms of just getting the meat across of what he was saying, that's not bad. And he's not this particular translator or interpreter, she calls herself, is not really adding a lot to the content, whereas some of these others, like the Message, especially Passion version, is adding a lot. They're adding their own opinions, and they want you to think it's the Bible. So let's take a look at the Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6, 9-13. Here we go. Let's start with the King James Version. After this manner, therefore, pray ye, Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done as it is in heaven, in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Now, that last part, the doxology, is something that is removed from most English Bibles today. That was part of the manuscripts that they had and that they were working on from when they did the King James Bible. But earlier manuscripts showed that was not in the original prayer. That's why you never see it anymore in any other English version. Here's the New International Version. That's the dynamic one that's very popular with Protestants. This then is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we have also forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one, which is actually more accurate to say evil one rather than evil. Here's the Living Bible. Pray along these lines. Our Father in heaven, we honor your holy name. We ask that your kingdom will come now. May your will be done here on earth, just as it is in heaven. Give us your food today again, as usual. And forgive us our sins, just as we have forgiven those who have sinned against us. Don't bring us into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Amen. Here's the Message. And you see the dots in that. The person who created this paraphrase didn't include the words of Jesus, this is how you should pray. So it's missing something. And that's what they're indicating there. Our Father in heaven, reveal who you are. Set the world right. Do what's best. As above, so below. Keep us alive with 3 square meals. Keep us forgiven with you and forgiving others. Keep us safe from ourselves and the devil. You're in charge. You can do anything you want. You're a blaze and beauty. Yes, yes, yes. I have no idea where that came from. This is how he's interpreting it, right? This is the Message. All right. This is not a paraphrase. Here's the Passion, so-called translation. It should not be called translation. It's not even a paraphrase. Pray like this. Our beloved Father, dwelling in the heavenly realms, may the glory of your name be the center on which our lives turn. Manifest your kingdom realm and cause your every purpose to be fulfilled on earth, just as it is in heaven. We acknowledge you as our provider of all we need each day. Forgive us the wrongs we have done as we ourselves release forgiveness to those who have wronged us. Rescue us every time we face tribulation and set us free from evil. So there you go. Here is here's the one. I'm looking for the one with Rapping with Jesus, but I didn't. I'm sorry, I didn't. Was looking for it. I obviously didn't mark the right place. We'll have to move on. But let's take a look at John chapter 1, the prologue, okay? So King James, this is a very famous, very important theologically. This is one of the passages that the Jehovah's Witnesses deliberately rendered incorrectly so that they could deny the divinity of Christ, the full divinity of the Son of God. King James Version, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. Here's a Revised Standard. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So that word, overcome, you notice that the King James says the darkness has not comprehended it. It means both. So a translator has to choose one. But I think it probably means overcome rather than comprehended, but it can mean that. New American Bible, this is the Catholic one. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Notice that most of so far we haven't departed from that basic concept, that basic sentence structure, and the basic translation, literal translation. He was in the beginning with God. All things came to be through him, and without him nothing came to be. What came to be, notice that, see where the for is in the middle of the sentence. What came to be through him was life, and this life was the light of the human race. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Now, I'll tell you what they did here. Now, if you look back, look at verse 3 up there for the RSV. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. Now, what they did is they took that second time, without him, not anything was made that exists. Nothing that exists was not made by him, is what it's trying to say. In the New American Bible, they start a new sentence, and they are saying that phrase, anything that exists, really belongs with the next sentence. Do you remember when I told you and showed you those manuscripts, how there's no punctuation, no capitals, no spaces? Somebody had to decide how the words are divided and what's punctuated how. I don't agree with this, but what they're saying now is what came to be through him was life, rather than everything that what exists. That's why I don't like it. I think it's really saying anything that exists, nothing was not made by him, and everything that does exist was made by him. That's, I think, what John is saying. He's saying it positively. He's saying it negatively. That's something that we see in the gospel. That's part of his style. So I don't like what they did there. But anyhow, now let's take a look at the New International Version. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Here's the today's English version, Good News for Modern Man. In the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's very important theologically. Very, very important. From the beginning, the Word was with God. It repeats itself. It's the idea of the eternity of the Son, that he is God equal to the Father. That's why it's important that this language is very important and we don't mess with it. And even the translators of today's English version kept that. Through him, God made all things. Not one thing in all creation was made without him. Notice that they do the same thing. They say it positively, and then they say the same thing negatively, because that's what John did. The Word was the source of life, and this life brought light to people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has never put it out. Okay, good. Here's the message. The Word was first. The Word present to God, God present to the Word. The Word was God, in readiness for God from day one. I don't know what the heck that means. And saying from day one suggests time. This passage has been used to prove the eternal existence of the Son of God, that he always existed outside of the realm of time. As soon as you say day one, you've destroyed that. You've destroyed the whole point of this passage. Continuing, everything was created through him. Nothing, not one thing, came into being without him. What came into existence was life, and the life was light to live by. The life light blazed out of the darkness. The darkness couldn't put it out. Here is the Passion. In the beginning, the living expression was already there. That's the word, instead of saying word. And the living expression was with God, yet fully God. They were together face to face in the very beginning. And through his creative inspiration, this living expression made all things. For nothing has existence apart from him. A fountain of life was in him, for his light is light for all humanity. This light never fails to shine through darkness, light that darkness could not overcome. And just for good measure, we will take a look at what Rapping with Jesus says from the prologue. From the beginning there was the Word, and that Word was with the Almighty. But more than that, that Word was the Almighty. Nothing begins or ends without him, because he is life, and life is the light of brothers everywhere. It shines in the darkness, but the dark doesn't know what hit it. Okay, so there's a place for that sort of thing. Okay, but before we close out our program today, and I appreciate your fact you're staying with us a little bit longer, this is what we have right now in English for Orthodox Christians, as far as I know. Of course, we have the Orthodox Study Bible. This is the New King James Version. I do get comments from people at times. They're not happy with some of the footnotes. But you know what? It's a start. This is the only thing we've got right now that really has a lot of very good footnotes and cross references and things like this. I think it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly good. Maybe some of us would not have explained certain passages and chosen. Remember, the footnotes are somebody's opinion. The footnotes, you can disagree with them. It still has a lot of nice information about the scriptures from an Orthodox perspective. Of course, this is just the New Testament. We also have the New and the Old Testament. Some of you may have seen this. I looked at a little bit at this. These books that were put out by a monastery, and I tried to figure out, because they're not telling us clearly what version it is. I was trying to figure out where they got this version from in English. It has some nice patristic notes in it as endnotes, not as footnotes. Basically, they're using the King James version. It sounds very King Jamesy. So if you don't care for King James, this probably wouldn't be good for you. And it says that they started with the King James because it's using the majority text of the Greek New Testament, but they also checked it against the approved text of the Patriarchate of Constantinople, and they made, some changes to it. So that's what they're really relying here on the King James version, with some changes that they have brought in from comparing it to the approved patriarchal text. And then there's another one that's kind of more recent that I haven't spent a lot of time with, and I don't know too much about, to tell you the truth, the Eastern Orthodox Bible. And I tried to find out more about this. This is supposed to be a brand new translation. It says on the inside here, see, New Testament, the Christian Greek scriptures based on the Septuagint and patriarchal text. So they're basing it on the approved text of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. It does. This is more of a, this is not like your Orthodox Study Bible. It doesn't have many explanatory footnotes. It's more scholarly. It doesn't have, so if you really want something that explains things better, that's a better choice for you. I tried to find out more about this version. I haven't spent any time with it. But when I went to the website that they said to go to, the easternorthodoxbible.org, it didn't come up. The page wasn't there, or at least my computer didn't pull it up. So I don't know why. I can't really tell you more about that. If somebody knows more about it and you want to illuminate me, that's fine. But it seems to be a perfectly good translation. It's not as user friendly if you're not real familiar with the Bible already. You want something that's easier to follow. Sometimes it makes a big difference when you have something like the Orthodox Study Bible, where passages are broken up into segments and you have these references, and it's easier to follow. Sometimes if you have a Bible where the chapters are not broken up and it looks more like this is the New English Bible, you might have something like this. You see this? I don't know how well you can see it with the glare. I'm trying to figure that out as I hold them up. It's just text. It's just solid text. And sometimes that white space, it's helpful to have the white space. It's helpful to have little editorial statements about Jesus returns to Galilee or wedding at Cana, so you can find things. Sometimes when it's like this, it's harder for you to read. If you like to read the Bible as though you're reading a novel, this is great. But if you want to be able to find things easily, sometimes it's good to have something like your Orthodox Study Bible, and it's a perfectly fine translation, okay? So we went a little bit over time. Thanks for sticking with me. I hope you had fun. And next week, we're going to start talking about the reason why I wanted to finish with this tonight. We're going to start talking about the formation of the New Testament canon, something that many of you have asked me about in the past. So we're going to talk about where the canon of Scripture came from in the early church, okay? So I hope you will join me next week with that. And for now, I'm Dr. Jeannie Constantino. You've been listening to Search the Scriptures Live, a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio. And now let's close with our prayer. Lord, now let your servants depart in peace according to your word. For our eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared before the face of all peoples, a light to enlighten the Gentiles and the glory of your people, Israel. Amen. Good night.
Depart in peace according to thy word. For mine eyes have seen thy salvation,